Key, did you want to? And just as an agenda for today, as I said, please add your name of affiliation in the chat. We'll have, when we get ready for questions, please put them in the chat as well. I'll monitor those. As part of today's 1 hour conversation, we'll start with a little bit brief background on Forefront for those of you who are not familiar with us, as well as briefly around the Mission Sustainability Initiative. And then we'll go into our topic for the afternoon and follow up with question and answers. We've left a fair amount of time for question and answers from all of you, so looking forward to a robust conversation. So Key, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sujata. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Key Montgomery, Forefront's Director of Philanthropic Networks. For those of you who are new to Forefront, we are a statewide convener of foundations, nonprofits, and their advisors and allies. Since 1974, we've been a trusted leader dedicated to strengthening and mobilizing the social impact sector. Our mission is to build a vibrant social impact sector that serves all people in Illinois through education, advocacy, and collaboration. Our goal is to foster a united, thriving sector that drives community well-being, economic security, and equity across Illinois. Forefront unites the state's social impact sector to tackle the state's most urgent challenges through collaboration, education, and strategic support. Our member networks offers a space for connection, coordination, and shared accountability. We lead sector-wide efforts to advance racial equity, including our Racial Equity Collective, a multi-sector initiative to scale equity infrastructure and drive unified strategic actions. Our policy and government affairs team advocates year-round at all levels of government to build a stronger, more supportive sector. We offer culturally responsive programming, technical assistance, and advocacy to support members' evolving needs. And through Mission Sustainability Initiative, we help nonprofits explore partnerships and strategies for long-term success. And with that, I will turn it over to Sujata, who will speak more about MSI. Thank you.
Thanks, Key. So the Mission Sustainability Initiative is a program of the Forefront, and we support a broad range of strategic partnerships and sustained collaboration models. So really do 3 things. One, we provide confidential conversations, so you can have as many conversations with us as you like. These are to help you sort of think about what is involved, the kinds of questions to ask, how you go about thinking about sustained collaboration. We understand that these things can be pretty tricky and sensitive, so we offer a safe space to provide some thought partnership and some guidance. The second thing we do is availability of resources. So in addition to an educational program and learning opportunity like we are having today, we also offer referrals to consultants and pro bono legal assistance. You'll find toolkits, checklists, case studies, and all kinds of materials that are available on our website. And you can find this at myforefront.org/MSI. So you'll see a series of web pages devoted to the work of MSI. And finally, a couple of times a year, we provide small grants to support one-time costs associated with currently for exploring strategic partnerships. We just made our last round of grants in April, and we'll look at what is available for next year shortly. Our fiscal year begins in July. There are a variety of strategic partnerships that you may be thinking about and building sustained collaboration models. I won't go into any of these in much detail because Scott, I'm sure, will address some of these, but at MSI, we support this broad range of strategic partnerships that include alliances and networks, shared service agreements, integrated organizations, and of course, part of what we're here to discuss today is and program transfers, which is part of the integrated organizations. If you want to learn more about the other models, you can find, again, recordings of past webinars at myforefront.org/MSI, and I encourage you to reach out to me to schedule a confidential conversation. You can reach me at msi@myforefront.org. As I said, today we're thrilled to talk about asset transfers, and we are pleased to have Scott Cotenoff of La Piana to lead us through a discussion on the topic. Scott is a partner at La Piana Consulting and has spent his entire career working to support diverse communities through nonprofit and public sector organizations. He's been with La Piana for over 12 years, where he's been guiding local, state, regional, national, and international organizations build strategies and culture that promote sustained impact. He's worked with dozens of organizations to consider and develop models for implementing different types of strategic relationships. He brings a background in public health, civil rights law, and creating change for people who are unhoused and their families. Prior to joining La Piana, Scott was the Senior Vice President for Programs and New Initiatives at New York City's Partnership for the Homeless and served as the Executive Director of Children's Hope Foundation and Body Positive. He has served on several nonprofit boards and currently sits on the board of directors for the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Scott, take it away.
Great, thanks, Sujata, and good afternoon to you all. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about this subject, to share our learning and to learn from you. As Sujata mentioned, we have carved out a significant amount of time for Q&A and discussion, and really want to create space for you all to ask questions, but also to learn from each other. As we'll see in a moment, there's several of you who have experience with various types of strategic relationships, so that certainly there are lessons that you've learned that would be helpful, not only for me in my practice, but also for your colleagues here on the call. I will say that throughout the presentation part, if a question is stimulated, then please do drop it in the chat, and we'll work to get on it for you. One other just piece of background to note. So as Sujata mentioned, I'm with a firm called La Piana Consulting. For 25 plus years, we've been working exclusively with nonprofits and foundations across the country on a variety of different types of work, but specifically have worked since our inception around different kinds of strategic relationships. And so the information that we'll be sharing is really based on that experience in working with organizations and thinking about what's worked, where there are challenge points, and what can be most helpful in a practical sense for organizations to move forward in a way that's sustainable and most impactful. So I'm going to share my screen for a bit as we walk through the presentation. As I said, if you have questions that come up, please pop them in the chat, and then I'll stop sharing and then we'll begin the conversation. Okay. So you can see even from the title here that there's an emphasis on strategy. And it's really critical that as you think about, and we'll talk about this more, as you think about strategic partnerships and different kinds of relationships, that you have a really clear understanding of how a potential relationship can help with your organization's strategy, with what you're trying to do. That it's not just a relationship for a relationship's sake, but it's a relationship to really help advance the work that you do as an organization. So today we're going to really hope to build your information and understanding of different types of partnerships and relationships, and we'll spend some time talking about the various types of relationships, have some discussion about what drives success, where there are challenges, etc. And also talks more specifically about asset transfers and when organizations have successfully considered asset transfers, under what kind of situations, and what's supported success for them. I should say that after this session, we will be sharing the slides out with you. So just know that they'll be coming at some point after we conclude. So our agenda for today, we'll start with, as I said, a review of various types of structures in using what we call a collaborative map, which sort of outlines different structures. We'll talk more about asset transfers specifically, understanding lessons learned for success, and then we'll move into questions and answers. So first, a bit about you all and the people who registered. So when folks registered, we asked just to understand quickly your experience with different kinds of strategic relationships. And here you can see that a significant portion of folks had some level of experience with short-term collaborations, some experience with shared services. A lot of people have explored different kinds of relationships. And we also have some people in the room who have little to no experience. And that's actually really great to know. And I would encourage those folks, don't feel that your question is too basic. We really want you to walk away with something practical that can be helpful as you're thinking about this and can advance your thinking to a next step. I often like to start these conversations with just a reminder about why collaboration or partnerships or these kinds of relationships are important to think about. You know, for many of us, and I was, as Sujata mentioned, I was an executive director for different organizations, including one that went through a merger. But there's often a pressure that organization leaders feel that, well, you know, a funder wants us to merge, or they think that collaboration is a good idea in and of itself. But it's really helpful to remember, and certainly in my dealings with the Forefront folks, this is really their orientation, is that collaboration is important to think about as a tool to enhance your capacity to deliver on your mission. And really that connection to mission and impact is really what drives successful relationships, regardless of the structure or form that they take. I'm going to start here with some options and talk through some options. And I want to say at the outset that while language is important, it's also important in this context not to get too hung up on labels. We put labels to the different structures because it helps us organize thinking. But what's most important is to really think about what it is you want to accomplish, rather than start with what kind of structure you want to achieve. And so while different people may call these different relationships by different labels, really what's important is how they help you achieve and sustain your impact and your mission. So to quickly orient you to the graphic that's on the screen, Hopefully you can see that there are three circles. There's an outer green circle and sort of a middle blue circle, and then a central circle that's sort of a mustard color. And I'll go through each of these circles, but to orient you, as you go from the outer circle in, the relationships become more integrated organizationally and more long-term with regard to the longevity of the relationships. So we start with this outer ring, what we refer to as collaboration. And here you see some examples of what fits into this outer ring. One of the important pieces about these kinds of relationships is that they often are focused around a very specific, a very discrete outcome, are often shorter in duration, and generally do not involve changes to the structure of your corporation, of the organization. So there might be, for example, several organizations which think it's important to do some budget advocacy around a particular piece of funding. And so you'll come together to advocate with a local legislature around budgeting. There may be a desire to build a cohort around shared learning opportunities. So you'll create a learning collaborative that will come together short term to build the strength and understanding and information of organizations that participate. You might look to build some sort of network to help either shared learning or shared resources. Again, this is a relationship that could be shorter term, could be a longer term, but it does not involve changes to your corporation, no changes to your bylaws or to your board or to your staffing structure, but really just an adjunct or a support to the work that you're doing. As we move in to the next circle here, you see relationships that tend to be a bit longer term, may or may not involve some formal manifestation of the relationship, an MOU or a contract, for example. So here there are things like joint programming, where two or more organizations want to deliver programming together. Either there's you alternate delivering services on site. So for example, we've seen organizations that do housing work and provide food and nutrition services work together, where the housing folks will come on site to where there's a food pantry, and they'll provide information and referrals and resources to the clients of the food organization. And then the food organization will come to the housing locations and connect people to food resources as needed. Again, working together to advance the impact of both organizations, and most likely through some sort of memorandum of understanding, but still each organization remains separate and remains independent. We also see in this kind of relationship, sometimes there are joint ventures around earned income. So two or more organizations will come together to create some sort of revenue generating activity, whether it's training, whether it's some sort of consulting service, whether it's some kind of, there were several years where retail stores were sort of a big opportunity for nonprofits. And so coming together, again, through a contract, through some kind of memorandum of understanding, to build a relationship that helps advance some sort of revenue opportunity. We also see quite regularly this notion of administrative consolidation, or what people often refer to as back office support. So here we're thinking about an organization that may have real strength in financial management or HR or IT or program evaluation. And through a contract with other organizations, they deliver those services. Again, there's not a change in the structure, but an organization has the ability to, through a contract, support another organization in their management of their finances, or in creating human resources policies, or in providing troubleshooting and support around IT. So more integrated these relationships are than the last ring, often created by a contract or some kind of memorandum of understanding, but still not a change in the structure of your organization. And then we have here the center. These are the most integrated relationships. This is often the place where people's minds go when they start to think about these relationships. And so here we have things like a merger, like what outside of the nonprofit sector is called an acquisition, or asset transfers. Here there are changes to the corporation itself, whether it's two corporations that come together to form one, or two come together to form a parent organization that supports the two subsidiaries, or, as we'll talk about in more depth, one organization transfers certain assets to another, in which they become part and parcel of that second organization. So this here is a long-term, these are long-term relationships. They're fully integrated in terms of structure. It's changes, they often involve changes to bylaws, changes to board composition, often changes to staffing composition. And these tend to be the kind of relationships that create the greatest impact, though they are also the hardest to create, because they have the greatest change to organizations. So there's a trade-off in terms of whether organizations want to pursue some or any of these, because it does take a lot of thinking and a lot of work, but as I said, can have the greatest and longest term impact in terms of the benefit. So I want to go more specifically into the concept of asset transfers, and just want to start with this overview of process. And this process really applies to any of those relationships. The length of time and the depth of work really depends on the kind of relationship that you're developing and the situation that you're developing. But you still will need to go from some kind of internal organizational assessment to understand what's needed, to some kind of discussion or negotiation, and then finally to some kind of implementation, which may involve some legal work or may not, depending on the kind of relationship. One thing I do want to say about the internal assessment. That's a really vital step that organizations often gloss over when they think about these relationships. There's often a sense of, oh, we should partner in some way, and then they'll go right to, let's try and find a partner and start to explore what that looks like, without really thinking about what for them as an organization is the reason behind entering into an exploration and a potential relationship. So being clear about your strategic priorities and your goals and your direction as an organization, being real clear about how a relationship with another organization can help advance those goals, and being clear about what you're willing to risk or to give over in terms of decision-making authority in terms of things like your name as an organization and your board structure and all of that. Having that thinking internally and being clear as an organization, not just as a staff leader, but staff and board together, having that kind of conversation so that as you look out to the world, to potential partners, you can match up and be clear about when you're reaching out to potential partners about why and what you're interested in. And then that kind of internal assessment can help you develop some guidance for determining whether your relationship, if you enter into some relationship, is successful. Is it helping us advance our strategic priorities? Is it aligning with our culture and our tolerance for risk? Is it aligning with our interest in retaining full autonomy or in potentially going deeper in a relationship? So that step is really key to creating success for any of these relationships that we talked about, including an asset transfer. So a lot of text on this this page, but here are some illustrations about when organizations may think about an asset transfer. So oftentimes we engage with organizations that have their mission is really around piloting programs or incubating new programs, and they've done that successfully, and they're looking to spin it off or find a new home for that program. So they'll think about an asset transfer. Sometimes organizations shift their programmatic focus, and they have one or more programs that maybe no longer align with that focus. And so we'll look to find another home for those programs rather than just sunset them or end them altogether. Or they may realize that they've become better at other things than at certain programs, and they'll look to find a home in an organization that has the orientation, the skills, the capacity to really succeed in advancing the work of that program. We have seen a number of organizations that are fiscally sponsored that are looking to then have the work that they do move out of the fiscal sponsorship type of relationship and into an independent nonprofit. Sometimes those organizations, those fiscally sponsored entities, look to just become their own nonprofit, but often they look to find a home for their work and have the assets transferred from the fiscal sponsorship relationship into a separate and independent organization. And there are often times when organizations are thinking about, in their mind's eye, they've envisioned something that's a merger or one of those deeper collaborations. But through the exploration process, it's become clear that there are a lot of liabilities attached to one of the organizations. And so rather than a merger in which both assets and liabilities would transfer over, they think only in terms of an asset transfer and move the assets over to another organization rather than move both assets and liabilities. So a number of factors we've seen have contributed to success for asset transfers. As I said, one of the most important things is to understand yourselves as an organization, so that internal assessment work and being really clear about how a relationship can advance your impact and advance your sustainability. And then taking it to another level, being really clear about how the assets that you are considering either transferring, if you're in that position, or if you're the receiver of those assets, how they really contribute to what it is that you're trying to achieve as an organization, your mission, your impact, there's growth for growth's sake, and there's mission creep, and there's all those other things that we as organizational leaders look to minimize. And so really being clear about how the specific assets that you're considering as part of the transaction contribute to what it is you're trying to do. Having clarity around that is a real driver of success. As is specificity about what's to be transferred. So it's one thing to say, oh, well, we're going to receive this program, but what does that mean? Are there staff involved? Is there funding that's coming over? That's another kind of asset. Are there tools that are developed or intellectual property that was developed as part of the program? Educational materials, evaluation materials. Is there a website for the program? All of those things should be discussed and be specified. Often what happens is there's a formal asset transfer agreement, and you want to specify exactly the assets that are to be transferred. These specific staff, their roles and who they are, this specific dollar amount that's to be transferred, and at what point it's to be transferred, and the tools are intellectual property. And being really clear about what that, specifically with regard to the IP and the tools, being clear about what that transfer looks like. Is one organization saying to another, we're transferring these and you're the owner of them? That's one version. Are they saying we're transferring to you the ability to use these assets, but we're still going to own them? That's another. So again, you want to be really explicit about the what that transfer entails and what the assets are to be transferred. You want to be clear about, particularly if you're the receiving organization, what's needed to really integrate and to successfully integrate the assets you're receiving. Do you have that capacity? Because it will require staff time. It will likely require additional financial need. And you want to make sure in advance that you understand as the receiver that you're going to be able to receive and successfully integrate those assets. Because you don't want the transfer to be such that it puts such a burden on you that you're not able to continue your existing work, let alone successfully integrate the assets that you receive. And then you want to have a plan, right? So it's not just, great, here's a contract on X date, we're going to receive all these, and then we're just going to continue on with the work. You want to make sure that you're very clear about how you're going to operationalize the integration of those assets, and be clear about the impact of those assets on your other work before that effective date, so that you're clear about how to successfully launch, and that the staff involved are clear about how their work may change in advance, that the community, whether it's your clients or partners or others, are clear about what you're doing, so they don't think that you're suddenly shifting focus or you're going to disregard historical work in place of new work. So there's clarity all around. It's also important to understand that that this involves change for your organization. Even in situations where you may be a large organization or a relatively large organization, and the assets you're receiving are, as a percentage of your budget, relatively small, you're still something of a different organization, and you want to make sure that folks understand what's happening, that you manage both the excitement around this new change as well as the potential anxiety around the new change. In the situation where there's a program transfer and staff are coming in, you want to help those staff understand what your culture is as an organization, what the opportunities are, For your existing staff, you want to make sure they're clear about what this means and what it doesn't mean. We're not taking in these new staff because we're going to let all of you go. Being clear about all of that and communicating that to staff. And really connect for everyone involved the reasons for the transfer and how this will make your organization stronger, more sustainable, more impactful. All of that is really important and important to do explicitly with people and not just assume that they know what it means. A couple of tools, and as I said, you will receive the slide deck afterwards, so don't feel like you need to scramble to jot these down. We have a toolkit. It's a merger and alliance toolkit. That's a free resource that walks you through step by step by step to think about and then ultimately start to engage in some of these conversations within your organization. So there's some information, there's some tools that you can use. And as I said, it's a free resource that's on our website. There's also a recent article that was produced by several, including a couple of folks on the webinar here, that specifically focuses on asset transfers that reiterates much of the information that I've shared, but can be a good resource to circulate around to your board members, for example, if it's something you're thinking about, or to your staff leadership team to help them understand the specifics of this kind of relationship. And with that, I will stop my share and we'll open it up for questions. And I see that there are several in the chat, but Sujata will.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That was very helpful to set the context and set the stage with lots of details as well. There's a question from Sendel, who's asking, his question is, who is most involved in each of the aspects of the work or who needs to be, I guess, to ensure a successful transfer? And how do you engage other stakeholders so that they're helpful? That's one question. We'll start there.
Great. And I also saw there was a little back and forth about the term MSO, and my apologies
Yeah.
leaving the acronym and not explaining it. So MSO, yes, is a management services organization, and that's often a third entity that's created that other organizations sort of relate and connect to. And then they deliver that management services organization delivers, as it says, management services. So often the mission work, the program work stays in the subsidiaries, but the executive leadership, the fundraising, the IT, the HR, all of those operational things are centered within that MSO.
So we used to have a behemoth organization here in town called Heartland Alliance,
right,
where they had that MSO with several subsidiaries, if you will,
right.
where the work was conducted. So no longer the case, but that's an example, I think,
Great.
that illustrates.
Great, thank you. So who's most involved in each of the aspects? So it's important as an ongoing conversation between staff leadership and board to talk about strategic relationships, to have that as part of your normal discussion around how do we continue to build and strengthen our impact and continue to build and strengthen our financial base. So that's one thing. It's best when it's just part of the ongoing discussion that staff leadership and board have, because you're not saying that, all right, now we have to merge by bringing it up, but just bring it up to engage in the discussion. Just as you're bringing up the possibility of different kinds of relationships and different kinds of funding opportunities and different kinds of strategies, that the more you normalize that conversation with your board members, the better positioned you will be if and when you decide to dive more deeply into that relationship. And to have with both your board, and if you have an executive team or a leadership team, discussions about, are there ways we should be thinking about partnership and collaboration with other organizations? And what are those ways? How would they strengthen our work? How would they advance our work? Funders are, I will say in all honesty, conversations with funders can be a little tricky, because most funders will want to support you as a partner, and engaging in a discussion with them about the potential for strategic relationships is part of that support and partnership. I will say that there are many folks, many organizational leaders, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly those who are newer to leadership, who feel hesitant to turn to a funder and say, you know what, I'm thinking about some sort of collaboration or some sort of strategic relationship, out of fear that that might be viewed as weakness, or we're challenged as an organization, and so maybe the funder should pull back a little bit. But hopefully what you'll see is the more you talk to funders about this, just as the more you talk with your board about this, you'll see that funders are really interested in helping you be sustained. And if a relationship is a way to do that, then let's figure out together how to make that happen. Because at some point you'll want to go back to those funders and say, okay, so we found a potential partner, but we need some help, and we want you to fund to support us. So to engage them in that conversation. Then, depending on the focus, you'll identify specific people within the organization to engage in sort of the cross-organizational discussions. If you're thinking that there's opportunity for a programmatic collaboration, for example, then it might be your lead program staff person and their lead program staff person coming together to flesh out some ideas. If there is the potential for something deeper, then it might be your executive director reaching out to their executive director and saying, we're interested in talking about some kind of relationship and see what happens. In those situations where there's a possibility for relationships from that center ring, that most integrated ring, then we often strongly recommend that there's a small team that comes together, a couple of board members and a staff leader or two from each organization that come together to explore what's possible and to think about what you can achieve together, and then based on that, what the relationship may be. So a variety of different kinds of people involved depending on the relationship. But the more you can, at least early on, normalize this as a topic with your board, with your senior staff team, and with your funders, the better positioned you'll be to engage in the discussions going forward.
Thanks, Scott. Sandil has another question about examples of when this didn't go so well and what happened.
So we
Or wasn't done well, sorry.
Yeah, so we have seen situations where organizations have not done the pre-thinking that I mentioned, that internal assessment part, and in particular have not had internal conversations about their culture, meaning how they communicate, what's your risk tolerance, how you make decisions, all of those pieces that are sort of make up the air that you breathe as an organization, and don't think about and discuss those with a potential partner organization. And you get into or you formalize a relationship, and there's such dramatic difference that instead of really coming together in a strong way, you either operate separately or you start to operate at cross purposes. And so the more you can be clear internally about what works for you, and then the more explicit you can communicate those and listen to your potential partner and have an honest discussion. These relationships are often among the most significant kind of decisions you can make as an organization. And so you want to be really rigorously honest about where you're strong internally and where you have challenges, and be open to having that conversation with another organization. And if you're not, or they're not really open, that's when the challenge can be created.
I wanted to follow up on that idea about how do you disengage after going down the path? You've gone down the path, and like, how do you know when to walk away? Kind of what should you consider in terms of red flags?
So, and here I will say, at the risk of being a little self-serving, here's where a third party can actually be really helpful, because they can bring that perspective in. But for your organizations internally, when you're starting to have questions about things like the cultural relationship, about the transparency and honesty of their responding to your questions, if it feels like they're asking you all the questions, and when you ask questions, they're not coming back with information, if you agreed to some next steps and they're not abiding by those next steps, those kinds of things are really eroders of trust. And when you're starting to feel that erosion of trust, or you're not actually taking steps to build the trust, that's when it starts to be a flag that comes up. If another organization is really saying, you know what, it's basically our way or the highway, then you might be better off saying thanks, but no thanks, because there's not a collaborative spirit that's being brought into the process. And so those are all things to think about and to look out for as you're engaging in those kinds of relationships.
We have a question from Kate, who was the former MSI director and one of the authors of the resource that you shared at the end of your presentation, the SSIR article. So Kate is asking, how long do you generally see the process of exploring and implementing an asset transfer taking?
So on average, and I would say that this is an average generated before January and before a new administration and before the somewhat of an upheaval that we've been seeing in the nonprofit sector, about 3 months for exploration and decision, and then the implementation the length of time for an implementation really depends on the scope of the assets being transferred. If there are a lot of staff, for example, that will take longer time, because it takes longer to integrate people than it does stuff. So you want to allow enough lead time to bring people in, to let folks get to know each other and build relationships. I will say that since January, February, it's been really important, particularly in some subsectors, depending on your relationship to the federal government, your relationship to work that relates to equity and inclusion. Those timeframes have been sped up, because with folks getting word that within 4 to 6 weeks, grant X is going to be withdrawn or program Y is going to be ceased, then it's really about let's try and move more quickly. And because the asset transfer discussion is about discrete pieces of your organization, that can often go more quickly. And because you're separating out assets from liabilities, that often can create a situation where a receiving organization can feel more comfortable and so can make a decision more quickly. That being said, there are still legal considerations and financial considerations. And so you'll want to make sure that you do your diligence, but that it's when there is that kind of emergency circumstance, that everyone involved understands the timeline and really is prepared to work within that timeline.
So Deidre, I hope that answers the question you have, which is 3 months seems fast for asset transfers. Completely new restructures, Scott, would take more time, or if we're talking full mergers and acquisitions, that will take more time.
So we generally say that for potential mergers or that internal that center ring, there's about a 3 to 5 month time period from when organizations begin a joint exploratory process to when a decision is made. And then, depending on what that decision is, lots of can be lots of time, several months before the full execution of that can happen. So a typical example is if there are two organizations that are operating on a July to June fiscal year and they want to launch something as of the next July, but they're starting their process in February, so that by May they may make their decision and the boards may vote, and then the May and June period are spent bringing staff together, making sure that systems are in place. We know what financial management software we're going to use. We know what CRM we're going to use. We know what donor database we're going to use, and data starts to get transferred over so that as of that July 1, you're able to operate as one organization. But even then, if you bring staff together, it will take time for the staff to feel as though they're one entity.
So, Sindel, your question goes back to mergers and the conditions under which they're most successful. You're asking, you're positing that it's most likely to succeed when two organizations are both healthy, clear sense of mission, commitment to aligning decisions, and relationship with reality. Is this accurate? And is this really when most mergers occur? And I'm happy to add my thoughts, but Scott, I'll let you go first.
So generally, yes, it's accurate. And it's often as you imply by your second question, it's often the exception that we find that many organizations turn to a more integrated relationship like a merger most often when they're experiencing or they forecast some kind of challenge in relationship. They see a downward funding trend that has continued over more than a 6 month period, or they have just been in discussions with a long-term executive director who's about to retire, and they're trying to think, should we recruit someone new or should we look for a merger partner? We talk with organizations, and many of us who do this work talk with organizations about not thinking about mergers and other kinds of strategic relationships as a solve to a crisis, but as a strategic tool. So as I said earlier, normalizing the discussions with your board about these relationships before you're in a crisis can help you think about entering into these kind of relationships before you're in a crisis and hopefully avoid the crisis. Having these kind of relationships with funders before you're in a crisis can help really bring them to the fore and help you to explore that. That being said, we see fairly regularly an organization that's struggling financially, looking to engage with an organization that is perhaps on sounder footing financially, to integrate in some way. I will say one of the questions in that situation, well, in any merger situation, but in that situation in particular, is this notion of what happens when we have shared funders, right? And I saw that someone had raised that question earlier, and that I will say that what we often see is that in a situation where there is a merger or some kind of deep integration, and the parties share a funder or more than one funders, and the hope is often that we can at least keep funding flat, the combined flat, for when the relationship is built, and then hopefully build on it. What we often see is that in the first year of an integration, there's a little bit of a dip, that the funder will say, okay, let's make sure that this actually works and that you're able to deliver on the promise of the relationship. And then once we see that, then we can move toward reinstituting the combined funding. So if each organization was getting a $50,000 grant, the first year of a merger, you might receive $75,000. Even though you're doing the same amount of work as you were before, there's a sense of let's make sure that it actually sustains. And then after year one, if it's starting to click, then we'll get you back up to 100,000 and maybe to more because you're delivering on more impact.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. I think we are almost at time. And Key, if you want to close us out, I want to thank you all in the meantime for your attention and for your interest in the topic. Stay tuned for more webinars. But if you have any questions and want to reach out individually, please reach out to me directly. I'll put my email in the chat and Key will close us out.
Thank you, Sujata. So on behalf of Forefront, thank you, Scott, for sharing your expertise on nonprofit asset transfers. When to consider an asset transfer, the factors involved in building change management into the culture. We also like to extend our sincere thanks to all of you for joining us today. We hope you found the discussion informative. So before we leave today's session, we have some resources and information we would like to leave you with. And you'll also receive a post-event communication that will include all this information as well as the recording and the slides from today's session. So we have an article from the Stanford Social Innovation Review on programmatic asset transfers. If you're interested in taking a personal dive into mission sustainability, we have a link there so you can explore that page on our website. We have a link because we really want to hear back from you. We want to hear how we are doing, and as well as because this information will help guide us in enhancing our future events and activities. And this is a shameless plug, but membership is very important to us. So if you are not a member of Forefront and you are interested in learning more about memberships, our membership and member engagement manager, Doris Bowens, will be happy to discuss these opportunities with you. And we are leaving her contact information in the chat as well. And upcoming events. If you want to know what we got going on for the summer, we have a link there where you can explore our events page. So those are some of the resources and information that we are sharing in the chats. And again, we will be following up with a post-event communication that will include all the information that we reviewed today, as well as resources. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we ask that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.